Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 107. Lord of the Western Sea 4. Fuff. It's really hard to grab a hand. Mok Jaeongun, whose mouth was covered in blood, smiled sardonically and muttered. He had contemplated in an instant how to approach this being called a spirit beast. How can I approach it? The being had seen him absorbing energy. That's probably why it tried to control him in a detached state through demonic energy and attacked. In this situation, by what means could he make it approach? It was a suspicious being, so unless he drew his last breath, it would never come close. The method he came up with as a last resort was none other than this. Lucky me. This method was a kind of gamble with his life on the line. The being regarded him as an insect while also considering him the key to getting out. So he was certain that it would try to keep him alive in any way possible. And that certainty was confirmed. Demonic energy beyond imagination was being sucked in through the palm by the ritual of binding incantation. It was incomparable to fierce beasts or monstrous beasts. The concentration and vastness were beyond imagination. It was hard to believe that this was a weakened state after being sealed for thousands of years. Then, at its peak, just how powerful would it be? Chong Ryong, whose spiritual energy had been drained and weakened, staggered and looked at Mok Jaeongun with a haggard face. She always felt that he was a fellow who surpassed expectations. Who in the world would risk their life and do such a crazy thing? Only that mortal is capable of it. It was the result of combining cunning, insight, and the boldness to make it a reality. That spirit beast had to keep Mok Jaeongun alive no matter what. Only then could it get out of here. This won't do. Although she had reached a perilous state by having more than 80% of her spiritual energy drained, helping Mok Jaeongun now would increase the chances of survival even more. A bloody light flowed from her near-dead eyes. Right at that moment. Stop it right now. The white-haired middle-aged man urged Mok Jaeongun. His hair, which had been flowing down alluringly, was standing on end as if his anger had reached its peak. These insect-like beings. How dare they deceive him and aim for his demonic energy? He had to detach the fellow's hand somehow. The white-haired middle-aged man nodded his head to detach Mok Jaeongun's adhered hand and invoked demonic energy. However, damn it. After adhering to the human fellow, the energy wasn't being controlled properly. It seemed to be escaping too quickly. In that case. At this, the white-haired middle-aged man tried to forcefully detach Mok Jaeongun's adhered wrist with his other hand. But at that very moment, the cavity transformed into a space filled with blood. It was Chong Ryong's realm of ghostly intent, the blood realm. The white-haired middle-aged man turned his head and made an absurd expression. Chong Ryong, who was on the verge of death, created a realm of ghostly intent by detonating all her remaining spiritual power. The blood that had opened the blood realm flew in like whips and seized the white-haired middle-aged man's left arm and both legs. The sticky blood whips turned tough like leather and restrained the being. You evil spirit. The white-haired middle-aged man, exploding with rage, tried to forcefully shake it off. The blood whips stretched due to the immense force. However, Chong Ryong's blood realm, which was prepared even for extinction, was not to be taken lightly either. More blood transformed into whips and seized the body of the white-haired middle-aged man, who was trying to shake it off. Arg. The white-haired middle-aged man's anger reached its peak. If he had regained even 30% or 10% of his strength from before being sealed, he could have exterminated such insects with a single gesture. But now he couldn't do that. He didn't know what this insect-like human fellow was doing, but the demonic energy within his body had become unstable and couldn't be properly controlled. Even in the midst of that, the demonic energy was continuously being drained. It had already exceeded 30% of what remained. At this rate, it might become difficult to even maintain his current form. Damn insects. It was a situation where he was caught between a rock and a hard place. If his life wasn't in danger, he could have detached his hand first, but if he did that, this weakened human fellow would draw his last breath. However, if he didn't detach from this fellow, his demonic energy would continue to be drained. If only that damn evil spirit wasn't interfering. He could stop it by tearing off the energy-absorbing arm with his other hand. But that evil spirit wasn't budging an inch, as if it was prepared for extinction. At this, the white-haired middle-aged man decided to take a bit of risk. Fine. If so. The only part he could move was the hand and arm holding Mok Jae-eun. The white-haired middle-aged man lifted Mok Jae-eun up. And then he struck down Mok Jae-eun's head to hit the floor first. "I'll knock him out." He was about to knock Mok Jae-eun out to stop the absorption of demonic energy. However, this insect. Even though he slammed his head hard enough to break the floor and blood was flowing out, Mok Jae-eun didn't lose consciousness. Ha. Ha. Instead he was staring intently at him with rough breathing. That gaze was extremely irritating. How dare a being no different from an insect look at him with eyes filled with such malice? Was he looking down on him? Fine. Let's see who wins. The white-haired middle-aged man lifted Mok Jae-eun up again and slammed him onto the floor. This time he made his entire body collide. The white-haired middle-aged man slammed him down so hard that cracks appeared and the stone floor caved in. Cough. Cough. The complexion of Mok Jae-eun, who had been slammed onto the floor, turned pale. And blood didn't stop flowing from his mouth. His internal injuries were already severe, so naturally his wounds worsened when he was slammed down. The white-haired middle-aged man repeatedly threw Mok Jae-eun onto the floor. Chang Ryong tried to stop this by pushing herself even harder to create blood whips to restrain the white-haired middle-aged man's right arm as well. But the blood wrapping around the right arm liquefied and melted away, perhaps due to the ritual of binding incantation. Therefore there was nothing she could do about this. Kook. For the first time, a cry of pain escaped Mok Jae-eun's mouth. As he continued to collide with the stone floor in a defenseless state, not only his internal organs but also his bones were breaking, and his body was being torn apart. At this point he should have lost consciousness, but the white-haired middle-aged man looked at Mok Jae-eun with absurd eyes. His gaze didn't die in the slightest. With a bloody and near-dead face, he was glaring at him intensely, and for a moment he even felt a chill down his spine. A chill down my spine? Instantly, the white-haired middle-aged man's expression distorted frighteningly like an evil spirit. Was that the emotion of fear? Did he feel such an emotion towards a mere human being no different from a lowly insect? Impossible. It can't be. Even thousands of years before being sealed, there weren't many things that made him feel fear. No, rather, those things possessed unimaginable strength. Didn't even the immortals of ancient times and those called heroes fear that golden fox and monstrous divine ray? But compared to those beings, this fellow was an insect, no, a parasite, so how did he make his spine chill? Had he become so weak after being sealed for thousands of years? The white-haired middle-aged man ground his teeth forcefully. The energy the fellow had already sucked in was close to 50%. Now it was truly perilous. At this, the white-haired middle-aged man suddenly pulled Mok Jae-eun, who was glaring at him, towards himself. "You parasite-like insect. It's all your own doing." Then he headbutted Mok Jae-eun with his forehead. What kind of act was this? At that moment, something strange was captured in Mok Jae-eun's eyes. Something hazy suddenly flowed out from the white-haired middle-aged man's body. It was as if a spirit body? It had a form similar to a soul. But that form wasn't like the appearance of humans during their lifetime, but rather like a star with light protruding and jutting out. Then that spirit body, which was assumed to have suddenly popped out. It penetrated through Mok Jae-eun's forehead. Ha! The moment it penetrated, Mok Jae-eun threw his head back as if his head had been pierced by something sharp. Ah no! Chang Ryong, who saw this, shouted. Unfortunately, she saw the moment it penetrated Mok Jae-eun's head from behind. It was undoubtedly out-of-body experience. It was the out-of-body experience of the spirit beast. All living beings possess a spirit body which can be called a soul, in addition to a physical body composed of molecules. After the physical body dies, the will is transferred to the spirit body, whereas in a living state the will cannot be placed in the spirit body. However, there are occasionally beings who awaken to this and make it possible. Is it trying to possess and control the body? It seemed that the spirit beast was trying to directly possess Mok Jae-eun with its spirit body through out-of-body experience and interfere. I have to stop it. Chang Ryong tried to shake and tilt the spirit beast's physical body to disrupt this. However, the white-haired middle-aged man's body didn't budge at all. Rather, it was maintaining a tense state by exerting force. How can this be? How could it simultaneously grant will to both the spirit body and physical body? It wasn't called a spirit beast that had lived for thousands of years for nothing. While they were doing so, convulsions occurred in Mok Jae-eun's head. Mortal! It seemed that the spirit beast's spirit body and Mok Jaeungun's soul had collided. Her expression darkened. She wanted to help somehow, but she had consumed so much spiritual energy that her body was becoming hazy, putting her on the verge of extinction. Holding onto the being was her limit. Could Mok Jaeungun really endure this? No matter how special Mok Jaeungun's constitution was, the opponent was a spirit beast that had lived for thousands of years. There is also a level to souls. That being was infinitely close to a god, so its will was on a different dimension from that of a human like Mok Jaeungun. Perhaps it would be a futile resistance. And as if that prediction was precisely fitting, black blood vessels bulged on Mok Jaeungun's skin, and a phenomenon of his body being dominated by possession occurred. This was the worst. The moment Mok Jaeungun's body was seized, everything would be over. His rolled-back eyes were trembling madly and black blood flowed from his mouth. Was it indeed impossible for human will to withstand the will of a spirit beast that had lived for thousands of years? At that moment, the blood whips she had been maintaining with all her might were severed one by one. She couldn't endure any longer as most of her spiritual power was exhausted. Now there was no hope. It was a moment so despairing that everything felt futile. Right at that moment, the black blood vessels that had been bulging all over Mok Jaeungun's face began to subside. Could it be? While she was thinking that, the rolled-back eyes that had been trembling wildly soon returned to normal. At that instant, the spirit body in the form of starlight that had penetrated Mok Jaeungun's forehead popped out and penetrated back into the white-haired middle-aged man's head. Then the white-haired middle-aged man suddenly let out a scream. Arg! What on earth was happening? While she was puzzled, the white-haired middle-aged man opened his mouth with eyes filled with tension. No fear, his arrogant expression nowhere to be seen. What in the world are you? What are you talking about? That thing inside you. Before he could finish his words, the white-haired middle-aged man suddenly made a pained expression. Then he began to writhe violently. What in the world was happening? Suddenly, the white-haired middle-aged man's skeleton began to change rapidly. What was this phenomenon? As the skeleton rapidly grew, fur even sprouted all over his face, no, his entire body. The speed was so fast that the fur seemed to tear through his clothes and cover his entire body in an instant. Even a tail sprouted. The skeleton and fur that had grown large enough to reach the ceiling of the cavity. It was becoming a form that could no longer be seen as human. A raccoon dog? That's right. The white-haired middle-aged man transformed into a giant raccoon dog about twice the size of a human. Was this the true identity of this spirit beast? As the body grew, the hand holding Mok Jaeungun became much larger and took the form of grasping. Because of that, the hand unleashing the ritual of binding incantation felt like it would break. Ugh! The white-haired middle-aged man, no, the spirit beast that had turned into a monstrous raccoon dog, spoke in an enraged voice. You bastard! I will definitely. At that moment, the eyes of the spirit beast that had turned into a monstrous raccoon dog trembled. That was because something made of faint light was somehow filling the spirit beast's neck, arms and legs. The spirit beast turned its head with trembling eyes. There, the scroll it had escaped from was floating in the air, and white string-like things were coming out of it, connected to the light shackles restraining the spirit beast's neck, arms and legs. Seeing this, the spirit beast shouted in a perplexed voice. This can't be. I clearly broke the seal and came out. Before those words could even finish, in an instant, the white string-like things pulled the spirit beast that had turned into a monstrous raccoon dog at a tremendous speed, and its body began to be sucked into the scroll. No. In response, Mok Jaeungun hurriedly withdrew the ritual of binding incantation and kicked the being with his foot. You bastard! Let's go together. The spirit beast being pulled by the white strings tried to grab Mok Jaeungun's ankle, but at that moment, something grabbed Mok Jaeungun's wrist and pulled him. It was none other than Chong Ryung. The eyes of the spirit beast, who had lost Mok Jaeungun in an instant, widened as if they would tear. However, it was no longer a situation where it could do anything. Arg! With a mad scream, the spirit beast was eventually sucked into the scroll. As the spirit beast was completely sucked in, a large raccoon dog that wasn't originally there was now depicted on a cliff in the landscape painting of the scroll, howling. The scroll that had imprisoned the spirit beast fell to the ground as if it had finished its job and rolled up on its own. Seeing this, the hazy Changryong spoke with difficulty. The seal wasn't completely broken. Seems like true luck. Well, at that moment her expression stiffened. The skin on Mok Jae-un's wrist that she was holding onto was crumbling. When she let go, his arm fell as if it had lost strength. The cracks spread throughout Mok Jae-un's collapsed body in an instant. Like the bare branches of winter, no, like a dying tree, the outer shell shattered and scattered. And from within that shattering shell, a new skin filled with luster was rising. Looking at this, Changryong couldn't hide her excitement and muttered, "Rebirth through transformation." Chapter 108, Fateful Luck. 1. Mok Jae-un's collapsed body was crumbling like tree bark. And from within that shattering shell, a new skin filled with luster was rising. Looking at this, Changryong couldn't hide her excitement and muttered, "Rebirth through transformation." Rebirth through transformation literally means changing the bones and shedding the womb. It's a phenomenon where the body undergoes a rapid change in response to enlightenment, and a truly strange thing had occurred. It's something that could only happen when one reaches the transformation realm. Originally, rebirth through transformation is only possible after gaining enlightenment at the wall called the end of the supreme transcendent realm and achieving 3 flowers gathering at the crown and 5 energies paying homage to the origin. Through these 2 enlightenments, when the conception and governing vessels are opened, one becomes able to handle energy incomparable to the supreme transcendent realm, and the body undergoes a rapid reconstruction to withstand it. However, Mok Jae-un had not crossed the wall. He had merely absorbed the demonic energy of the raccoon spirit beast who called itself the Lord of the Western Sea. Yet to think that rebirth through transformation occurred to withstand that energy. Strange. Strange indeed. How could such a body exist? He hadn't even crossed the wall, yet his body was reconstructed to withstand that demonic energy. One couldn't help but click their tongue in amazement. Different. The sequence of this fellow's growth process was completely different from that of ordinary martial artists. Indeed, from the beginning he had accumulated death energy, which could be called evil energy, in his Danjian, and even controlled it with a reverse energy circulation technique. Perhaps it was natural for it to be different. I might be witnessing the birth of a master with a completely different form from the martial arts world thus far. Having this thought, a smirk unknowingly escaped her lips. She wondered what it would have been like if she had accepted him as a disciple while alive, not after death. However, if she had been alive until now, she would have been a hunched old granny. As the dead skin completely peeled off, Mok Jae-un raised his body. Skin dust falling off. His entire body felt light. He sensed that his body's energy was not only full but had surpassed its limits. Just a moment ago, it had been painful as if his insides were being burned by fire, but there was no more pain. Even his broken bones had all healed as there was no abnormality in his movements. Was I lucky? This time he had been prepared to die. But fortunately, contrary to that resolution, a fateful encounter had come, and he had become even stronger. Stronger. It was truly fascinating. The spirit beast that had been sealed for thousands of years and weakened. Just by absorbing the power of that spirit beast, his energy had increased so explosively. At this level, even a master who had reached the pinnacle stage of peak realm wouldn't be a problem. Mok Jae-un suddenly recalled the words of Zhou Yuigong, the diviner. "You heard there was no one?" "Yes. I don't know who you heard it from, but it's not entirely impossible." "It's not impossible?" "Yes. I too didn't believe it at first. But it is real. Among the diviners who have received the title of God, there are 2 who have subdued spirit beasts and made them their servant spirit." 2. Yes. 2 of them. It's astonishing. I'm saying this just in case, but Azura. They are beings from outside the world. To begin with, one of them is a human and a malevolent. Anyway, spirit beasts have surpassed the realm that humans can handle. They are disasters themselves. Zhou Yuigong had said. He said that among the 6 divine diviners, considered the pinnacle of diviners, 2 diviners had spirit beasts as their servant spirit. Recalling this, he thought he still had a long way to go. He couldn't even handle a spirit beast that had been sealed for a long time and weakened. It was fortunate that the power of the seal still remained. Otherwise, he would have lost his life here. But what did that being mean by those words? He remembered the words spoken by the monstrous raccoon spirit beast when it came out of his body. What in the world is that thing inside you? What did it mean by saying there was something inside me? Mok Jiongun was puzzled. Come to think of it, most of the vengeful spirits that had tried to possess him also seemed to have a shocked reaction after discovering something. What could be inside him that even a spirit beast would say such a thing? It was puzzling. At that moment, Mok Jiongun looked at Chong Ryung. Ah. Mok Jiongun frowned at her hazy appearance. She had become more transparent than when she had grabbed his wrist and pulled him, and she was gradually becoming more so. Chong Ryung. Rebirth. Through transformation. This is quite interesting. Despite having learned martial arts, for only a short time, you entered the initial stage of Transcendent Realm, but reconstructed your body through rebirth. At this rate, you might really reach Transformation Realm within 2 years, as you boldly declared. Chong Ryung, your spiritual energy has greatly weakened. Trying to save you, I ended up like this. I didn't do it to hear words of gratitude, so you don't need to pity me. She was reciting as if making her last words while struggling to speak. It was clearly visible to Mok Jiongun's eyes as well. Her spiritual energy, which was like a blazing flame, was gradually diminishing like a dying candle. To her, Mok Jiongun asked in an uncomprehending tone, I told you not to come in, so why did you? If you die, we all die anyway, so what do you expect me to do? Chong Ryung answered as if hesitating for a moment. At her appearance, Mok Jiongun stared intently at her face. At this, Chong Ryung spoke in a burdened tone. Why are you staring at me like that? Surely you're not feeling sad that I'm being extinguished? Being extinguished? Yes. There is no more hope for me. Chong Ryung was somewhat aware of it. Her spiritual energy had already weakened to the point where she couldn't maintain her own spirit body. She had a vast amount of spiritual energy to live as a vengeful spirit for 100 years. But having lost most of it, how could she remain? With your personality, you wouldn't grieve over the death of a servant spirit. So just listen to one request. I don't desire anything else. Just the Heaven and Earth Society. Before Chong Ryung could finish her words, Mok Jiongun grabbed her hand, and he said, let's talk about that after you recover first. What? As soon as that question ended, a majestic energy surged in from Mok Jiongun's hand. It was an energy quite different from her spiritual energy. Demonic energy? That's right. It was the demonic energy Mok Jiongun had seized from the raccoon spirit beast. Mok Jiongun had absorbed enough demonic energy to reconstruct his body, refine it into evil energy in his Danjian, and still have some left over. As the demonic energy surged in, her eyes trembled. What is this? A strange thing occurred. Unlike malevolent spirits that could swallow and devour even vengeful spirits couldn't accept or absorb the demonic energy of those higher entities close to them. But the demonic energy was surging in through Mok Jiongun's palm. And that demonic energy was filling her entire body. Her spirit body, which had been becoming transparent, gradually became denser. Then it quickly returned to its usual appearance. But it didn't end there. Wait. Concentrate. The amount of demonic energy surging in exceeded the level of spiritual energy she originally possessed. This fellow. At this, despite being a spirit body, she sat cross-legged. And as if circulating energy like when she was alive, she focused on making the incoming energy her own. How can this be? Watching this from outside the red line, green spirit Gyu Soha's eyes widened. It was clearly visible to Gyu Soha's ghostly eyes. Chong Ryung's spiritual energy was rapidly increasing, and it was trying to raise her level beyond her original limits. And eventually it truly materialized. A chilling energy that rippled and spread around Chong Ryung. Due to that, the bookshelves around the cavity shook violently. As her level rose even higher, the spiritual energy flowing from her spirit body greatly influenced even the world with substance. Chong Ryung opened her closed eyes. A fierce bloody light that gave an even greater sense of pressure to the onlookers. Even she herself let out an exclamation as if feeling that her level had risen higher than before. At this, Mok Jiongun let go of her hand and said, "It seems I'm not the only one with good luck. What did you do? Could have been dangerous. It turned out well. At least better than being extinguished, right? You really... She couldn't finish her words. She had been prepared for extinction, but her level as a vengeful spirit had risen. It couldn't be more ironic. To such Chongryong, Mok Jiongun said, "If my eyes aren't mistaken, it seems your level has risen even higher. Should I call you Indigo Spirit now?" Indigo Spirit. The basic writings of the school of Yin and Yang states the following. A vengeful spirit that has existed for more than 300 years. Its spiritual power reaches a level where it materializes beyond auditory and visual hallucinations, and it is a being close to a disaster, almost on par with high-ranking malevolent spirits such as demonic beasts. To subdue it, at least 100 diviners are required, but even that is uncertain. Should this also be called fateful luck? Mok Jiongun was still connected to Chongryong through the servant spirit bond. But the fact that her level had become strong enough to reach that of a blue spirit was no different from his power increasing by another level. At that moment Chongryong spoke. "Forget it. Just call me Chongryong." "Pardon? If you keep changing it back and forth it'll be confusing, so just call me Chongryong." As she spoke bluntly and turned her head away for no reason, Mok Jiongun smirked and said, "Could it be that you like the name Chongryong? What nonsense are you spouting?" Chongryong glanced at Mok Jiongun and snorted. At this, Mok Jiongun shrugged his shoulders as if to say, "If you say so." While they were doing so, someone's voice was heard. "Master." Their green spirit Gyu Soha, with both arms missing and half-transparent, was teary-eyed. Seeing such Gyu Soha, Chongryong narrowed her eyes and sighed, saying, "Do you have any demonic energy left? I'll be waiting, so please make sure to come and get me." Elder Yang Muwon, the keeper of the treasure vault, spoke to Mok Jiongun, who was about to pass through the formation at the entrance, as if earnestly pleading. As evident from his changed tone, Gyu Soha had possessed his body. They had to take this measure because Elder Yang Muwon had witnessed something and couldn't just leave it alone. However, despite verbally pleading to come and get him, Gyu Soha's expression was quite gleeful. "She's in high spirits." "In high spirits indeed." Well, that's understandable. That's because Gyu Soha, who had absorbed the remaining demonic energy Mok Jiongun possessed, had astonishingly risen from a green spirit to a blue spirit. She was originally close to a blue spirit, but the high-purity demonic energy had properly acted as an uplifting force. Anyway, after entrusting this place to Gyu Soha, Mok Jiongun passed through the formation at the cavity entrance and descended the cliff. There, senior warrior Guak Munjiai was waiting with a bored expression, leaning against the cliff. Then, when someone tapped his back, he was startled and tried to take a defensive stance while keeping a distance. But, "Oh, you. Did you wait long?" Mok Jiongun asked with a bright smile. At his appearance, Guak Munjiai's expression stiffened. What in the world? Although Mok Jiongun had qualified as a provisional elder, the energy he sensed was at best only first-rate, so he had considered him a step below himself. But what was happening? "I can't sense it." He could barely sense the energy of Mok Jiongun in front of his eyes. Both his presence and energy were faint. He was right in front of him, so what was going on? Could it be that he had gained some enlightenment in the treasure vault? Chapter 109. Fateful Luck. Gyu Soha, who had possessed Elder Yang Muwon, the keeper of the treasure vault, was diligently carrying rock fragments and cleaning. She had to erase the traces of what had happened here as much as possible. Throughout doing these chores, a smile didn't leave Gyu Soha's lips. That was because not only had her level risen, but she had also gained a body, albeit temporarily, and even had free time. Moreover, it was in this treasure vault overflowing with vast amounts of secret manuals. Hee. Although she had become a vengeful spirit, Gyu Soha was originally a martial artist at her core. Naturally, before her death she had aimed for a high realm, so this place filled with secret manuals was no different from paradise. As Gyu Soha was organizing the small cavity where the red line was drawn, she looked at a bookshelf with only a lone wooden box placed on it without anything else. What could it be? The wooden box was none other than the one containing the scroll that sealed the spirit beast. That wooden box said to be made from sacred spirit wood. Strangely, the box that had shattered and turned to ashes had returned to its original state. Is it truly the power of immortals? Mok Jiongun, Chongryong, and Gyu Soha had all witnessed the sight of something already broken and decayed returning to its original state. It had occurred at the moment when Mok Jeon was pondering what to do with the scroll in his hand. As if time was being rewound, the surrounding dust gathered and formed the shape of the wooden box, returning it to its original state. It's truly fascinating. Even Gyu Soha, a vengeful spirit, found it peculiar. Should it be said to have transcended the realm of sorcery? Thanks to that, Mok Jeongun, who had been contemplating what to do with it, ordered Gyu Soha to stay here for a while and guard the wooden box. I think I'll have to leave it here for a while. You won't eat it? No. It might cause trouble if I eat it. I'm joking. I know it's not a joke. The master likes to eat these things. Anyway, it seems best not to touch this for now. If anyone comes in here and tries to touch or look for the wooden box, please let me know. Yes, master. Mok Jeongun was interested in the one who had left the sealed wooden box here. Why had they left such a dangerous thing in this place? Perhaps by guarding this place as instructed by the master, she would find out whether that person with 3 eyes mentioned by the raccoon spirit beast would appear or not. It was late at night in the inner city of the Heaven and Earth Society. In the garden of a large estate located in the southwest of the city, there was a middle-aged man with a sharp impression and a small stature, standing with his hands behind his back, gazing at the moon. As he was immersed in appreciating the moon, someone's cough was heard behind him. Ahem. At this, the middle-aged man with a small stature turned around as if he knew. And he put his hands together and bowed in greeting. I am honored that Thunderbolt Fist King, one of the 5 kings, has come to this humble place. The middle-aged man with a mustache, who appeared to be in his mid-50s, had no sleeves visible on his arms, and he wore strange iron rings on his muscular arms. He was Won Byung-hak, the Thunderbolt Fist King, one of the 5 kings, the highest-ranking executives of the Heaven and Earth Society. Won Byung-hak also bowed with his hands together and spoke to the middle-aged man. It's been a while. Shadow Clan Master. The identity of the middle-aged man with a small stature was the Shadow Clan Master. 1. Although his position was 1 level below the 5 kings, he was one of the 3 chief masters, a high-ranking executive of the Heaven and Earth Society. Unlike other chief masters, his name was attached due to confidentiality, so everyone called him by his title, Shadow Clan Master. Oh ho ho. It's been a while since the grand meeting 2 months ago. At the Shadow Clan Master's ingratiating voice, the Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak subtly frowned as if he wasn't used to it. That was because this man's way of speaking was never easy to adapt to, no matter how many times he heard it. It reminded him of the eunuchs in the Imperial Palace, and because he mixed in a tone that women would use, it sometimes even gave an unpleasant feeling. He's truly a peculiar one. Even the face he was seeing now wasn't real. It was a human skin mask. A human skin mask was a thin mask similar to skin, made using human or pig skin to create a form that was difficult to distinguish from a real human face. The Shadow Clan Master was the only one in the inner city who was allowed to wear this human skin mask. Even if he's in charge of intelligence and secrets. Was there a reason for him not to show his real face even to them? The Shadow Clan Master changed his human skin mask about every 3 months, so the only one who knew his real face was said to be the society leader. Hugh. Anyway, what was important wasn't his real face. The Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak said, Shadow Clan Master. I must first apologize for rudely visiting at such a late hour. Not at all. I heard you came and went a couple of times while I was away, so how could it be you who should apologize? I should be the one feeling sorry. Thank you for saying that. Oh ho ho. Then, may I ask the reason for your visit at such a late hour? Of course. In fact, since it might be a request more discourteous than visiting late at night, I brought this as a bribe and gift to the Shadow Clan Master. The Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak held up a white wine bottle in one hand. At this, the Shadow Clan Master asked in puzzlement, What is that? This is firewood wine that has been aged for 25 years. Oh, is that true? Firewood wine. It was one of the famous Shaoxing wines along with Nuerhong wine and was called a famous liquor. It was a wine that became deeper in fragrance and stronger in flavor depending on the aging period, and it was also a wine used to celebrate special occasions. The Shadow Clan Master accepted the wine bottle as if he was grateful and said, I don't know if I should receive this. Since it's a bribe I brought, of course you can accept it. I drank Nuerhong wine at my daughter's engagement ceremony, and I brought this firewood wine after much contemplation. Firewood wine was a wine that was brewed and buried when a son was born, and then taken out and enjoyed with relatives and friends on the day the son grew up and took the civil service examination, passed as a top scholar, or got married. However, the Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak had no son. He had buried it along with Neurhong wine 25 years ago before his daughter was born, so he had been wondering when to take it out and drink it. Since the Shadow Clan master liked aged wine, he brought it here. For you to bring such a precious item that you cherished, it would be difficult to refuse the request even before hearing it. It may be discourteous, but perhaps it won't be a big request for the Shadow Clan master. Not a big request? The Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak bowed with his hands together and politely said, I know it's rude, but if there is a trainee from an esoteric realm gate at tomorrow's final ceremony of Corpse Blood Valley, I hope you can yield to me. Esoteric realm gate? That's right. It's a child I've had my eye on for a long time, so I came late at night risking rudeness. The Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak's request was just that. At the final ceremony tomorrow, the executives participating will have the right to select the trainees who pass the final gate as their subordinates. Here, Won Byung-hak had already set his sights on a trainee from an esoteric realm gate. At this, the Shadow Clan master said, We don't know the results yet, but judging from your words, that trainee seems to be a quite outstanding talent. A child with potential. Someone with the qualifications to complete the True Source Thunderbolt Fist. He already had one disciple. However, he failed to complete the final stance of the True Source Thunderbolt Fist and ended up with a crippled right arm. That's how difficult it was to even learn his unique skill. So you've been going around asking other executives who will be at Corpse Blood Valley tomorrow. In fact, the Shadow Clan master had predicted his purpose to some extent. Due to the nature of the Shadow Sect, which dealt with intelligence and secret agents, he was always keeping an eye on the city. So he had guessed that he was going around asking for something related to tomorrow's final ceremony. And that guess was correct. I see. All right. However, he didn't reveal this. If he found out that his movements were being tracked, it would only upset the Thunderbolt Fist King's mood. I know it's a rude request, but not at all. After receiving such a precious wine, how could I refuse the Thunderbolt Fist King's request? Oh, so you can do that for me? Of course. Oh ho ho. At the Shadow Clan master's ingratiating laughter, the Thunderbolt Fist King lightly bowed his head to express his gratitude. That's how much he coveted that talent. To him, the Shadow Clan master said, By the way, if it's not too rude, may I also make a request to the Thunderbolt Fist King on this occasion? A request. Actually, since there is only one right to choose, it's fine, but I'm telling you in advance in case you change your mind. What do you mean? Yes. I also have one talent I covet, so I'm participating in tomorrow's final ceremony to take them as my disciple. At those words, the Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak nodded his head. He had expected that to be the case. The Shadow Clan master had never participated despite having several opportunities. The fact that he was participating this time meant, could it be that child? From the Demon Fire Hall? Yes. That's right. As expected. His prediction was correct. The Demon Fire Hall was once called the Four Great Assassin Groups. The rumor that a girl with tremendous talent from there was participating in the gates of Corpse Blood Valley had spread even among the executives. You don't need to worry about that. I only want a boy with a physique capable of properly utilizing the Thunderbolt Fist. Oh ho ho. Thank you for saying that. It's a relief and I'm grateful. The Shadow Clan master clapped his hands like a woman and spoke. His voice was so androgynous that the Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak inwardly wondered if he might be a woman. Although her talent was outstanding, the fact that he was choosing a girl made it even more so. But he was contemplating whether he should tell him or not. That fearsome woman was also coveting the girl from the Demon Fire Hall. Mo Harang of the Demon Fire Hall slightly furrowed her brows. Suddenly, her right ear felt itchy, and if this wasn't Mok Jaeongun's room, she would have wanted to stick her finger in and scratch it vigorously. Your expression looks like your ear is itchy. She inwardly flinched at Mok Jaeongun's words but tried her best not to show it. Anyhow, he was remarkably good at reading others' thoughts. But why did he suddenly call for her? And at such a late hour? Could it be because of the final gate tomorrow? Unless there's a special variable, There's no way someone monstrous like you would fail to pass the final gate. In the end, she asked out of curiosity, "But why did you call for me?" After agreeing to become a faithful dog or slave, she treated Mok Jae-eun with the utmost respect. To her question, Mok Jae-eun replied, It's nothing much. Can you be my light sparring partner?" Sparring partner for what? She unknowingly swallowed her saliva. It was slightly suspicious that he had called her alone late at night when he usually didn't. Could it be that calling her in the middle of the night? "Can you spar with me?" Spar. For a moment she let out a soft sigh. Should it be said that she was slightly relieved? Indeed, if this devilish man had seen her as a woman, he wouldn't have treated her like a faithful dog or slave after poisoning her. But what's with this sudden talk of sparring? He had already sparred with her once, so sparring would be largely meaningless. Or not. Thinking about it, it might not be so meaningless. Come to think of it, the final gate might be a pure test of martial arts, unlike the previous ones that tested survival skills and potential. In that case, using sparring to sharpen one's senses beforehand could also be a method. And I did want to get my revenge. Although she had pledged loyalty due to the poison, she had vowed to break free from it someday. And with her own righteous skills at that. Emo Harang's eyes changed as she looked at Mok Jae-eun. Her eyes were already moving back and forth, searching for Mok Jae-eun's weaknesses. It's different from back then. Back then she couldn't accurately gauge Mok Jae-eun's level. But now, after observing him closely several times, she had an idea of his martial arts level and what he was skilled at. She was already picturing it in her mind. To fight against Mok Jae-eun, she had to avoid directly clashing with him as much as possible. Usually, when his true energy and trajectory differed, even a slight collision would cause the martial power to scatter. It was the same for her master. If I don't give him an opening, a somewhat lethal picture could be drawn. Back then she had approached the fight with the intention of not killing Mok Jae-eun, so she didn't use killing techniques or secret skills. But if she approached it with the real intention to kill, it might be possible. Your eyes are brimming with enthusiasm. Well, if that's the case, you can attack me with the intention of really killing me. What? If you subdue me, I'll give you the antidote. At Mok Jae-eun's words, Emo Harang's expression changed significantly. Just a moment ago, it was merely a hypothetical situation she had envisioned. But if there was a reward at stake, the story would be different. If the linked kill and the secret sword technique of the Killing King, the flash shadow flying dagger technique, were combined, she was confident she could kill anyone at her level. Do you really mean that? Yes. I promise. If you can subdue me right now. Before Mok Jae-eun's words could even finish, small daggers in the shape of hidden weapons popped out from the sleeves of her right and left arms. It was a preemptive strike. She intended to make the first move before Mok Jae-eun could react and decide the match. The origin of her martial arts was assassination. Therefore, the key was to disrupt the opponent's timing rather than openly fighting against them. However, Emo Harang's expression instantly stiffened. What is this? What was going on? She was certain that she had moved first as soon as he finished speaking. But somehow Mok Jae-eun's blade finger was already touching her neck. I didn't see it. Back then she had thought that she was far superior, at least in terms of speed. But now she couldn't see Mok Jae-eun's movements at all. She couldn't even perceive it, yet the tip of his finger was touching her. You're slow. Drip. At Mok Jae-eun's words, a drop of cold sweat trickled down Emo Harang's fair cheek. It felt like her neck would be pierced with the slightest movement. Chapter 110, The Final Gate, 1. She couldn't even perceive it, yet the tip of his finger was touching her. You're slow. Drip. At Mok Jae-eun's words, a drop of cold sweat trickled down Emo Harang's fair cheek. It felt like her neck would be pierced with the slightest movement. Inwardly she was perplexed. Although she acknowledged that Mok Jae-eun possessed a strange power that differed from others, she hadn't considered it as superiority in martial arts. But what was this? He has changed. What on earth had happened overnight? Even if she excluded judging Mok Jae-eun's martial arts through energy perception, since it was impossible in the first place, what was going on? The sharp energy transmitted from the tip of his blade finger was almost akin to the feeling one would get from masters who had reached the realm of ascension. This feeling, it's similar to father's no? It was similar to what she had felt from the clan leader of the Demon Fire Hall. The only supreme master of the transcendent realm she could contend with, the clan leader of the Demon Fire Hall. That feeling emanated from Mok Jaeongun. No. It can't be. Mo Harang instantly denied it. No matter how talented one was, reaching the initial stage transcendent realm at a mere 17 or 18 years old wasn't a simple feat. Even if he had gained enlightenment, how could he become so strong overnight? Could it be because he ate that? The Heavenly Earth Pill. It was an elixir made from the secret recipe of the Heaven and Earth Society, and just eating one pill could grant 10 to 15 years' worth of internal energy. The gap between 10 and 15 years was absolutely insurmountable. But can such a difference occur just from this? Mo Harang continued to be confused. Seeing her like that, Mok Jaeongun was inwardly satisfied. Due to the overlapping fateful encounters in the treasure vault, he had entered the transcendent realm, but he still couldn't accurately judge his level. So he had initiated a sparring match with Mo Harang, whom he had previously fought, to confirm how much he had improved. Not bad. The gap had definitely widened, as Chong Ryong had said. The saying that Transcendent Realm Supreme Masters and Peak Realm Masters were incomparable realms now made sense to him. Her every movement was too clearly visible, unlike last time. "You're still far, mortal." At that moment, Chong Ryong's voice rang in his ears. "You may have shed your novice shell, but even within the Transcendent Realm, the difference between the early, proficient and pinnacle stages is distinct. You still have a long way to go. It should be that way." Of course, he had no intention of letting his guard down. The target of his revenge might be a peerless master at the peak of the supreme transcendent realm, close to enlightenment, so his current level was not yet satisfactory. However, apart from that, a different emotion arose. Mok Jaeongun had considered martial arts and sword techniques as mere tools for revenge. But upon reaching a higher realm, he developed an interest in this thing called martial arts. How much stronger could he become through martial arts? More. I want to taste more. It was a pure emotion he hadn't felt in a long time. While he was doing so, Mo Harang spoke to Mok Jaeongun. "Did you perhaps consume the Heavenly Earth Pill?" That." Mok Jaeongun took out a small pouch from his bosom and showed it to her. The Heavenly Earth Pill was inside it. Chong Ryong disliked calling it the Heavenly Earth Pill. So in front of her he called it the Moonlight Pill. "I haven't eaten it yet." "What?" At Mok Jaeongun's words, Mo Harang frowned as if surprised and stared at the pouch. She had naturally assumed that Mok Jaeongun had consumed it. But he had become so strong in a short period without even eating it? Is he a monster? She had thought she would never be inferior in martial arts, but for some reason she felt conflicted. Could she really escape from the clutches of this devil? Around noon the next day, in the plaza behind the dormitory of Corpse Blood Valley, several chairs were placed around the stage, and guests from the inner city were arriving one by one. Interest flickered in the eyes of Corpse Blood Valley leader Lee Jiom, who was standing on the stage. It was because an unexpected person had appeared. The Shadow Clan Master? A middle-aged man with a small stature and a sharp impression. He had been puzzled by the unfamiliar face, but upon hearing his identity he couldn't help but be surprised. That was because the Shadow Clan Master had never participated in the final ceremony before. Considering his position and his extremely secretive nature, as well as the peculiar rumors surrounding him, Lee Jiom had been curious about him. However, he exceeds expectations. He had tried to gauge his level to some extent through energy perception, but it was difficult to accurately discern. That meant the Shadow Clan Master's martial arts were either almost on par with his own or perhaps even higher. If this was true, it was quite unexpected. Lee Jiom had gained enlightenment from the secret technique Mok Jaeongun had given him in the past few days, further advancing his martial arts. But if even he couldn't gauge the Shadow Clan Master's level. Ting! At that moment, a sound that pierced the eardrums. At this sound, the gazes of those who had arrived earlier turned towards the entrance of the plaza. There, a beautiful woman was lying in a seductive pose on a four-person sedan chair. At first glance she appeared to be in her late 20s or early 30s, but the aura she exuded was extraordinary. Ting! As the string sound rang out once more, an executive sitting on a chair shook his head. That executive was none other than the Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak, one of the 5 kings. It's starting again. She was a truly unpredictable woman. If it weren't for that self-centered personality of hers, she would have risen to the position of the fourth clan leader. But due to her uncontrollable nature, she couldn't enter the inner city despite receiving the title of Valley Master. In terms of skill alone, she could have become a clan leader or even higher. Ting. As the string sound rang out once more, a few of the red-belted warriors nearby frowned. It was due to the true energy infused into the sound each time she plucked the string. She who could infuse internal energy into sound was the Summoning Sound Valley Master Hang Yuriang. Corpse Blood Valley leader Li Jiom clicked his tongue inwardly. Even that woman has come. Unlike the Shadow Clan master, Li Jiom knew her well. In the orthodox sects and even in the martial arts world, there were those with unique martial arts lineages, and one of them was sound techniques. In reality, there were only a handful of people in the Central Plains martial arts world who could properly utilize sound techniques, and the Summoning Sound Valley Master Hang Yuriang was one of them. Ting. The Summoning Sound Valley Master Hang Yuriang, lying in a seductive pose on the four-person sedan chair, plucked the string of the lute with her finger. Then the ripple that had spread through the sound earlier grew larger. As a result, some of the red-belted warriors with relatively weaker internal energy couldn't endure it and covered their ears. She hasn't changed. It was truly a bad habit. She would often unexpectedly infuse sound techniques into the lute strings, making those around her uncomfortable. Even the good-natured vice clan leader had strongly warned her about it. Of course, she must have ignored that warning as she continued this bad habit. Phew. Anyway, feeling that he couldn't just leave her be, Li Jiom cupped his hands and spoke loudly. It's been a while, Summoning Sound Valley Master. Valley Master, Valley Master, Valley Master. His voice echoed throughout the entire plaza like a reverberation. The majestic true energy contained in his voice caused interest to flicker in the eyes of the Summoning Sound Valley Master Hang Yuriang, who had been lying seductively. No, the executives who had arrived earlier were the same. With just this greeting, they could infer that Li Jiom's internal energy had deepened compared to before. Of course, it was the same for Hang Yuriang. She spoke as if surprised. Corpse Blood Valley leader's internal energy has deepened since the last time we met. How could that be? Your modesty is excessive. It's not modesty. Rather, upon hearing the beautiful sound of the lute strings, I feel that the Summoning Sound Valley Master's cultivation is deepening day by day. The power infused in the sound makes even my insides churn. Ho ho. Is that so? Although he spoke indirectly, his true intention was simple. The people around could suffer internal injuries, so stop infusing power into the strings and cease it. That was the meaning. She also instantly understood this, but, ting. Then, as an apology to the Valley Master, I should play a proper tune for you. This woman really. It was truly a troublesome situation. As per custom, he had sent an invitation letter asking for her attendance, but naturally he had assumed she wouldn't come given her personality. But she suddenly appeared and acted as she pleased according to her unique temperament, making it extremely difficult for him. At this, Li Jiom looked at the Thunderbolt Fist King Wan Byung-hak, one of the 5 kings seeking his help. He was asking for a higher-ranking executive to intervene. However, he saw Wan Byung-hak sitting still, turning his head away and feigning ignorance. No matter how self-centered she was, if he, a superior executive and one of the 5 kings, stepped forward and warned her, it would be difficult for her to ignore it. But he couldn't understand why he was acting like this. I'm sorry, Corpse Blood Valley leader. In fact, Wan Byung-hak had met her beforehand and received a confirmation that she wouldn't touch the child from an esoteric realm gate. They had things to give and take, so he couldn't bring himself to intervene. If she, with her self-centered nature, became displeased and targeted the child from the esoteric realm gate that he had his eyes on, it would become troublesome. Seeing that the Thunderbolt Fist King Wan Byung-hak wasn't intervening, Li Jiom reluctantly looked at the Shadow Clan Master, one of the 3 chief masters, a level above him. But the Shadow Clan Master merely covered his mouth with his hand and laughed like a woman. He didn't seem to have any intention of intervening. No other choice. Li Jiom clicked his tongue inwardly. Since it had come to this, even if he became uncomfortable with her, it seemed he had no choice but to take a strong stance. Towards her who was plucking the lute strings. Summoning Sound Valley Master. That's enough. At that moment someone's voice was heard. At this, she who had been plucking the lute frowned and turned her head. The one standing there was none other than the Bright Blade King. The Bright Blade King Sun Yun, one of the 5 kings, was standing there with a large sword on his shoulder, glaring at her with a grim expression. His imposing presence, with a larger build than the average person and covered in scars, was unmatched among anyone present. The Bright Blade King has also come. The summoning Sound Valley Master Heng Yiriang stopped plucking the lute and bowed with her hands together. Li Jiom inwardly welcomed Sun Yun's appearance. Sun Yun was renowned for his resolve even among the 5 kings. He disliked crossing the line and had a clear sense of likes and dislikes. He had clashed with the self-centered Heng Yiriang several times before. There were even rumors that she had nearly lost her head to the Bright Blade King Sun Yun's sword. In a way, he could be considered her natural enemy. Did I come to a place I shouldn't have? No, how could that be? Then do it in moderation and sit in your seat. Isn't the Corpse Blood Valley leader unable to proceed with the final gate because of you? At his sharp tone, Heng Yiriang's eyes sharpened. It seemed the rumors about their poor relationship weren't false. The atmosphere had become quite cold. It was almost a touch-and-go situation. At that moment, Corpse Blood Valley leader Li Jiom stepped between the two and spoke with his hands cupped. It's an honor to have the Bright Blade King also observe. The heavy atmosphere was temporarily alleviated. The Bright Blade King Sun Yun, who had been intensely staring at Heng Yiriang, turned his head, relaxed his expression and said, "Corpse Blood Valley leader. It's been a while. It has been a while. I didn't expect the Bright Blade King to come to the final ceremony." The reason Corpse Blood Valley leader Li Jiom said this was simple. The Bright Blade King Sun Yun already had outstanding disciples. Especially in the case of his chief disciple Wu Horang, his talent was so exceptional that he was considered one of the top 5 promising successors within the Heaven and Earth Society. But for him to participate in the final ceremony was puzzling. There's a reason for that. A reason. At Li Jiom's words, the Bright Blade King Sun Yun turned his head and looked at someone among the 6 boys standing in the plaza. That someone was none other than Mok Jiangun. What? He lost to whom? Until just the day before he had no intention of coming here. However, upon hearing that his youngest disciple Yip Weixian had not only caused a major incident but had also been defeated by someone, his mind changed. Not long ago Mok Jiangun was just a peak realm master. Yet he had defeated Yip Weixian, who had reached the transcendent realm and had received martial arts instruction from him. He couldn't help but come here. Chapter 111. The Final Gate 2. The Bright Blade King Sun Yun remembered Mok Jiangun as clearly being at a mere third-rate level. Of course, that didn't mean he considered him insignificant. Mok Jiangun had learned the sword techniques of the Moon Vein, which had been lost 100 years ago, and also possessed innate talent in sorcery. Therefore, although Mok Jiangun was from the orthodox Yun Mok Sword Manor, Sun Yun had brought him to the Heaven and Earth Society. It was not only important to draw out the moon sword technique within his mind, but Mok Jiangun, who had been chosen by the secret manuals, could possibly become a talent of the Heaven and Earth Society. However, he thought all of that had been ruined due to the whim of the Heaven and Earth Society's leader. Send him to Corpse Blood Valley. It's the society leader's order. Do you intend to disobey? But... tisk. He couldn't understand the reason. Why did the society leader order the 2 hostages from Yun Mok Sword Manor to be sent to Corpse Blood Valley? He didn't even meet them face to face. The Bright Blade King Sun Yun abandoned any lingering attachment to Mok Jiangun because of that. Even if he had learned the moon sword technique, the place he was being sent to was Corpse Blood Valley. A place where more than 80% of those who enter come out as corpses. How could a mere third-rate novice survive in that place teeming with trainees possessing first-rate qualifications or higher? It's over. Would the moon sword technique be completely lost like this? While he was feeling disappointed yesterday, he couldn't hide his shock due to his disciple's honest report. What? Say it again. It's not that I completely lost. I let my guard down and... No. The fellow's name. Mok Jiangun. Mok Jiangun. That boy was alive. A mere third-rate fellow was sent to Corpse Blood Valley? If it had been the youngest of the Yun Mok Sword Manor hostages, Mok Yuqion, he would have understood. He had acknowledged Mok Yuqion's innate qualifications to that extent. But Mok Jaeongun had survived until now. How could this happen? Master. Shut your mouth. The day before yesterday he had received a message requesting his attendance at the final gate and final ceremony. But the fellow had not only reached the final gate but had also obtained the top disciple placard by winning against Yip Xian in the hidden treasure vault. Even for him who didn't bat an eye at most things, he couldn't help but be surprised by this. At this, the bright blade King Sun Yun fell into deep contemplation last night. What on earth had happened in Corpse Blood Valley? How could Mok Jaeongun, who was merely a third-rate, become so strong in such a short time that he could defeat his youngest disciple Yip Xian, who had reached the transcendent realm? Various questions overlapped. However, without seeing it directly, there was no way to resolve these questions satisfactorily. Therefore Sun Yun made a decision. Let's confirm it myself. He already had 5 outstanding disciples known as the 5 Tigers, the top talents within the Heaven and Earth Society, including his chief disciple Wu Horang. Thus he had no desire to accept any more disciples. However, he decided to step forward to verify Mok Jaeongun's unusually rapid progress. If Mok Jaeongun demonstrates extraordinary qualifications surpassing his expectations upon seeing him, he had thoughts of accepting him as a disciple even if it meant being scolded by other executives. He was a successor who had learned the Moonsword technique and survived despite being sent to Corpse Blood Valley by the society leader's whim. He couldn't miss this opportunity. Having finished his momentary recollection, the bright blade King Sun Yun looked at Mok Jaeongun, one of the 6 standing side by side in the plaza. Sun Yun slightly furrowed his brows. It was difficult to give a definite answer due to the distance, but based on his energy perception, Mok Jaeongun's level seemed to have reached the end of the first rate. What is this? Of course, even this could be considered remarkable. In a short time he had progressed from the 3rd rate to the end of the 1st rate. However, at that level, it would be difficult to defeat his youngest disciple Yip Xian. The gap between the Peak Realm and Transcendent Realm is distinct. Even if there were 10 Peak Realm Masters, it would be difficult to defeat a Transcendent Realm Supreme Master. But by what means did Mok Jaeongun defeat Yip Xian? It was incomprehensible. What technique did he use? As he was intently staring at Mok Jaeongun, his eyes flickered with interest. It was because he had discovered not only Mok Jaeongun but also Mok Yucheon. That child also survived? It was truly surprising. As a result, both of the Yun Mok Sword Manor's hostage children had survived. Of course, he had thought that Mok Yucheon, who possessed innate martial talent unfitting for his age, might survive if he was lucky. But to think he had really survived, and even entered the top 6 while overcoming the numerous talents belonging to the Heaven and Earth Society. Yun Mok Sword Manor. It wasn't a place to be underestimated. It was really unexpected. On the other hand, seeing the changed gaze in Mok Yucheon's eyes, he was pleased. When he saw Mok Jaeongun, he was surprised by the advancement in his martial arts, but his expression and gaze were no different from before. In contrast, Mok Yucheon seemed to have become quite sturdy, and a murderous intent was even visible. It was as if he had shed the shell of a gentle orthodox sect person after surviving Corpse Blood Valley. Coming here was the right choice. It had become interesting. One fellow surprised him with his tremendous progress, and the other fellow surprised him with his transformation from back then. To think the fellows from an orthodox sect, not those from the Heaven and Earth Society, would capture his interest. It was truly a sight to behold after living a long life. It's regrettable. Mok Jaeongun clicked his tongue as he looked towards the front of the stage. That woman called the Summoning Sound Valley Master had appeared, and it seemed like something interesting was about to unfold, but it was thwarted midway by the appearance of the bright blade King Sun Yun. Tisk tisk. Chong Ryong clicked her tongue at Mok Jaeongun. There's no opponent as troublesome as a master of sound techniques. Unlike other martial arts, sound techniques take a completely different path, so there are no allies or enemies. What did that mean? While he was puzzled, she spoke as if reading Mok Jaeongun's thoughts. It means it's impossible to target a specific person with sound techniques. A specific person? Indeed, the concept of sound techniques itself was to infuse true energy into sound and create shockwaves. However, sound isn't something that only certain people can hear or not hear. Unless one is deaf, they have no choice but to hear it in some way. He seemed to understand why Chong Ryong said those words. If that woman unleashes her sound techniques with determination, it will damage the entire surroundings. In that case, there would be an incident even before the final gate could be held. However, this made Mok Jae-eun curious. Why would someone learn a martial art that indiscriminately harms both allies and enemies with such a risk? If sound techniques are the only focus, it's inefficient. It might be effective against a large number of opponents, but if there are many people around, the risk is too great. But he didn't think that was all there was to it. Even he, who had only been exposed to martial arts for a short time, could think of these shortcomings, so there was no way a specialist in sound techniques would be unaware of them. Anyway, the interesting spectacle had disappeared, and an unexpected person had appeared. The Bright Blade King Sun Yun. The very person responsible for bringing him to the Heaven and Earth Society. He could see Sun Yun staring intently at him. Judging from his gaze, which didn't particularly show emotions of anger or joy, it seemed closer to trying to confirm something. Could it be that he came to see me? If that was the case, it was quite unexpected. Mok Jae-eun suddenly recalled the incident in the Corpse Blood Valley treasure vault. Yip Wai-seon, the disciple of the Bright Blade King Sun Yun. It's that fellow. He only found out his identity after fighting him. It seemed that Yip Wai-seon had reported to his master about Mok Jae-eun. Otherwise, there was no way he would appear and stare at him out of nowhere. The puzzling point here was, is he not angry? If he had come out of anger after his disciple was harmed, his gaze should have shown rage or something similar, but it didn't. In that case, it seemed there was no need for great concern. Rather, is it not time yet? Mok Jae-eun was waiting for someone. The one he was waiting for was none other than Annihilating Poison King Baek Saha, one of the 5 kings. According to Corpse Blood Valley leader Lee Ji-yeom, Annihilating Poison King Baek Saha participated in the final ceremony almost every time, so there would be an opportunity. But there was no sign of him appearing yet. What if a variable arises? That would be quite troublesome. The most ideal situation right now was to pass the final gate as the top disciple and gain the right to choose. The top disciple of the final gate is granted the right to choose an executive at the final ceremony. Of course, whether they would be accepted as a disciple or subordinate depended on the executive's choice, but at least it would provide an opportunity to be close to them. However, for some reason he had a bad feeling. If a situation arises where he doesn't come, Mok Jae-eun's gaze turned towards the executives sitting on chairs next to the stage. According to Lee Ji-yeom, the middle-aged man wearing iron rings would be the Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak. The one next to him would be the Summoning Sound Valley Master Hang Yeoriang, and the one next to her. Was he called the Shadow Clan Master? It was quite unexpected. According to Lee Ji-yeom's words, the Shadow Clan Master and the Summoning Sound Valley Master had rarely attended the final ceremony, and given their dispositions, the probability of them not coming this time was high. But the ones who were said to be unlikely to attend had come to the final ceremony. Among the expected individuals, the only one who matched was the Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak. Mok Jae-eun stroked his chin. The final gate was about to begin soon, but at this rate, there seemed to be no way to become the disciple of Annihilating Poison King Baek Saha. Should I go with the alternative? Mok Jae-eun had the benefit of obtaining 3 top disciple placards. Apart from the final gate, you can request teachings from one of the 12 elders, including the 5 kings, 3 chief masters and 4 valley masters, who can be considered the top masters of this sect. Originally, he had intended to use this benefit to learn from one of the 5 kings who had received the title of 8 stars, known as the top masters in the Central Plains, as suggested by Corpse Blood Valley leader Lee Ji-yeom. Chong Ryong had also agreed with this. An opportunity to receive teachings from a Transformation Realm true Grandmaster won't come easily. Mok Jae-eun also thought there was truth to those words. Chong Ryong always told Mok Jae-eun, there was no need to be fixated on one thing and one should have a broad scope of thinking. Martial arts could also provide an opportunity to broaden one's thinking by listening to the views of various masters. But I might not be able to do that. If Annihilating Poison King Baek Saha doesn't show up at the final ceremony, he would have to use this benefit. Only then could he inquire about the Ghost Blade from him. About 2 hours passed. The only ones who appeared before the start of the final gate were Bo Hyuk-so, the Grand Elder of the Flame Demon Clan, which was ranked 5th among the 100 martial clans of the Heaven and Earth Society, and Dae So-man, the Elder of the Scarlet Blood Clan, which was ranked 7th. Among the 100 clans, the elders of the clans ranked within the top 10 were given the title of Grand Elder. Their treatment could be considered equivalent to that of a quasi-executive. No choice. Mok Jeongun clicked his tongue as if he was disappointed. In the end he had to choose among the Bright Blade King Sun Yun, Thunderbolt Fist King Won Byung-hak, Shadow Clan Master, Summoning Sound Valley Master Hang Yeoriang, Flame Demon Clan's Grand Elder Bo Hyukso, and Scarlet Blood Clan's Elder Dae So-man. Of course, this was under the assumption that he would pass the final gate as the top disciple. Corpse Blood Valley leader Lee Jeom stepped onto the stage and opened his mouth. Now that all the observers have gathered, we will commence the final gate. Lee Jeom lightly flicked his finger. Then warriors in red belts brought a large wooden board and placed it right next to the stage. It had several lines drawn horizontally and vertically with blanks left in various places. Seeing this, the trainees' eyes narrowed. A tournament bracket? It seemed to be a tournament bracket. If names were filled in the blank spaces, it would form a perfect tournament bracket. In other words, to clarify, this is a tournament bracket for sparring. The final gate was revealed. It was none other than sparring. Unlike the previous ones, it was the most primitive method of testing. The trainees have tested their own limits through various gates until now, and as a result they stand here. And the final gate is now an opportunity to showcase your potential to the observers. Martial arts competition. Through this, they would have the chance to display their respective martial arts. How much they showed here would determine the range of choices available to them. Sparring. The trainees' eyes became serious. Unlike before, they had to prove their skills in front of the executives. It was only natural for them to feel nervous and have exceptional motivation. However, there was one problem here. The number doesn't match. The number of trainees was 6. If they were to have matches, 8 would be the most ideal number. That way 8 would compete, then 4 and then 2, allowing them to determine the final winner. But since there were 6, inevitably, advancement without a match. Advancement without a match. In other words, 2 people could reach the final match with just 1 bout. At that moment, the senior warrior Guak Munjiai went to the tournament bracket and began writing numbers. Among them, the ones who drew 5 and 6 could reach the final match with just 1 bout. Then Corpse Blood Valley leader Lee Jeom pointed to a table placed in front of the stage. On it was a wooden box with circular holes on top. As you can see, since the number doesn't match, we will draw lots to determine the tournament bracket. Then someone raised their hand. It was Yun Muong from the Esoteric Realm Gate. Unlike the previous gates, this was the final gate and the executives were watching, so he stepped forward without hesitation. May I ask one question? Speak. Those who advance without a match and those who advance after 2 bouts will be at a disadvantage in terms of stamina and everything else. Will it be valid? Everyone nodded in agreement with these words. Then Corpse Blood Valley leader Lee Jeom smirked and soon spoke. Naturally, it will be difficult for those who have to fight 2 bouts to manage their stamina, so they will certainly be given sufficient time to circulate energy and recover. And the final match to determine the winner will only be a contest of techniques without internal energy. Yun Muong from the Esoteric Realm Gate lowered his hand, seemingly somewhat convinced by his words. If they were to suffer injuries, the story would be different, but it seemed like an attempt to eliminate the disadvantageous conditions to some extent. At this time, Mok Jeongun muttered softly, "Couldn't we all just fight at once?" Tisk tisk. At these words, Mok Yucheon, who was right next to him, openly clicked his tongue. If that were to happen, who would everyone here consider as the first target to deal with? It would be none other than Mok Jeongun. In a group match, they would try to eliminate the most dangerous opponent first, so it wouldn't be a fair match. Of course, Mok Yucheon still didn't know the fact that 2 out of the 6 were Mok Jeongun's subordinates. Then Corpse Blood Valley leader Lee Jeom continued speaking. Now, the trainees will come forward in order and draw the metal balls inside the wooden box. The time for the drawing had come. The first opportunity to choose was given to those who had the lowest scores in the previous gate. They were Mok Yucheon and Yun Muong from the Esoteric Realm Gate. Perhaps because he was afraid of being told he had the lowest score if he went first, Yun Muong didn't step forward right away. So Mok Yucheon was the first to draw a metal ball from inside the wooden box. Mok Yucheon's number was 6. At these words, Yun Muong from the Esoteric Realm Gate showed a slightly disappointed expression. No matter how fair they tried to make it, the advantage of being able to fight for the championship with just one match as 5 and 6 was inevitable. Ha! Mok Yucheon looked at the 6 he had drawn and scoffed. Should this be considered good luck? While he was doing that, Yun Muong drew a number tag. It was 4. Unfortunately, the advancement without a match had flown away. It was disappointing, but there was no other choice. Next, Mo Harang from the Demon Fire Hall came forward and drew a metal ball. 3. At those words, the corners of Yun Muong's mouth twitched. She was an opponent he had wanted to face at least once, as they had always been compared in this Corpse Blood Valley gate. Next, Mu Zhengyak walked forward. Mu Zhengyak didn't mind either way. After all, while winning was important in this gate, it was also an opportunity to showcase one's talent to the observers. 1. The number Mu Zhengyak drew was 1. Next, Yom Jie from the Vermilion Slaughter Cave walked forward. The demonic monk possessing Yom Jie had no particular thoughts about this drawing, so he expressionlessly put his hand in and drew a metal ball. The number was 5. At those words, the expressions of two people changed. Mok Yucheon, who already thought he owed a debt to Yom Jie from the Vermilion Slaughter Cave, showed a delighted expression as Yom Jie became his opponent in the bracket. And the other person was none other than Mu Zhengyak. Naturally, without even drawing lots, he sighed as he looked at Mok Jiongun, who had become his opponent. It ended up like this. He had thought the day would come when he would directly face Mok Jiongun. But it had already arrived. The first match against the most difficult opponent. Mu Zhengyak shook his head back and forth. The person he had considered as someone who would be troublesome if he became an enemy among his peers was none other than Mok Jiongun. But to think they would face each other like this. His fists naturally clenched. It wasn't particularly out of fear. He didn't think he would lose right away. He had a secret technique that no one could defeat after all. This elevated sensation was simply overconfidence. Mu Zhengyak approached Mok Jiongun and spoke while extending his hand. We ended up facing each other like this. Regardless of who wins, let's do our best. At these words, Mok Jiongun grabbed his hand and spoke as if it was troublesome. That seems difficult. What? If I do my best, the match will become too boring, so I'll go easy on you. So you do your best. What nonsense was this guy spouting? Was he provoking him now?